Culture is revealed when behavior collides with values.
This is the Leaders Rising podcast. Creating bigger futures, building thriving cultures. We believe you can become a leader worth following.
Oh, hey, Jeff. Welcome back to the podcast. This has been an interesting middle of the summer kind of week for our team. Highs and challenges alike.
It has been both. We've got people celebrating some new beginnings and excited to be traveling and enjoying summer. Life is heavy sometimes too, right? When we are working with friends and people, like life happens.
And it's good to pay attention to the pulse check of your people and relationships. And you had a follow-up with one of our team members after a conversation yesterday that prompted, yes, that was a certain version of me. It was a little more raw and unfiltered. Well, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. Let's push through that. But that's a conversation that I think a lot of leaders don't have or don't maybe slow down enough to have. But it's really critical to pay attention to those details.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we get into business mode and we're here to deliver. We're here to get the work done. And so we can just try to keep pushing things forward, even when people are maybe raw around the edges or they're carrying other parts of life in with them. And when we can just slow down enough to notice and acknowledge, that's going to create, actually stronger team bonds, strengthens trust, grows relationships. And I think we believe that leads to better performance over time as well. So I think both things can be true. But yeah, if we're moving too fast, I think that's a thing that you and I have experienced this week. Our summer has kind of gotten compressed into a week as we are both navigating some travel and family plans and things like that. And so just being gracious with ourselves, being generous with ourselves about what we actually expect, choosing to do what's important, and some things can wait.
Yeah, I knew that was a reality for me, the schedule of this week, last week versus the next 2 weeks. I'll be out of the office the next 2 weeks. I knew that was coming for me, but actually hearing it, I knew your schedule coming up and a few others on the team. But I heard from more of our team yesterday as we kind of called this question. They're like, oh yeah, I have a week coming up. I have some time coming up. I have a gear shifting opportunity coming up to rest and recharge. And I think that's my favorite part of summer. Somebody asked us on a call the other day, asked me, okay, is this like an unplugged or an unplugged? And I was like, no, this is the 1 week of the year that I aim to be completely unplugged. By the time this goes live, I will probably be back in the office already, but you will be halfway around the world. What are you guys doing?
Yeah. In the past year, my wife and I have both celebrated a big birthday. For a few years now, we've been planning towards this as a European trip along with some other family members. Mostly it's going to involve eating really good food and beautiful sunsets and beautiful places. So, I wouldn't be one to say out loud places like Italy and France and Spain. But, if we were going to places like that, that'd be pretty awesome.
Well, that sounds like a great trip, a great experience. And I know you've already forecast you will be completely unplugged for those 2 weeks. I just hope they accept the AARP card over there.
Well played.
But all right, Jeff. So speaking of healthy, thriving cultures where you can banter and have a little fun like this, talk to us about where we're headed today in this conversation about culture at work.
Yeah, I think so often whenever anything goes awry or, somebody's underperforming or something's not going the way we expect it to, leaders can be quick to blame culture and say, well, that's just a culture problem. If people would just follow through or they're not motivated anymore. And all they're really talking about in those moments is symptoms that they're experiencing. And all those symptoms just distract us from the solution that's actually where we need to go. And so one of the things we are going to talk about today and that we talk about over and over again with our clients is that culture isn't the goal. It's the system revealing the problem. Culture is not the goal. It's the solution. So when we're running into problems, we're not going to say, well, culture is what caused that. We're going to say culture is how you can go about solving that. In fact, I think that's what we ran into this week. Like we were kind of in this compressed time frame and we're all feeling a little stressed and maybe not at our best. I don't think that's a culture problem. I think culture gave us permission to solve that, to be generous with ourselves, to be kind, to be realistic about what we could do and realistic about scheduling some things for later.
One of the things I've noticed in a lot of companies, and I'm going wider than even clients, but any company that I've worked with, shopped from, experienced, a lot of companies put a poster up on the wall, or they've got a banner, or they've got some catchphrase. But what's the difference between that and the culture that you're really talking about here?
Yeah, great question. Back in June, I actually wrote a whole series of stuff on LinkedIn about culture isn't what you think it is. Culture is not a vibe check. Culture is not a pool table or a ping pong table. It's not all the fun stuff. Culture is really just how we do things around here. It's in the little moments. I'd say culture is more about what happens in those little moments and those side conversations in the meeting before and after the meeting than it is about the big idea on a poster or in a brochure. I love Edgar Schein. He is a organizational psychologist. His take on culture I found really helpful and informative. He says, don't focus on culture. Focus on the problem, the challenge, the goal, and how culture is either helping or hindering the progress you want to make in those areas. So, I think when we make culture such a big deal, we overplay our cards and we try to make big changes when really it's the micro conversations, those micro gaps where culture is going to make the biggest difference. I think that's what we're going to unpack more today.
A few years ago, I was taking a look at some research on what was forecast as the workplace of 2020. And there were some pioneering kinds of things there. But one of the things that I recognized was that culture's likely by 2035. So I took these 2020 outlooks and said, okay, what's next beyond this? And I started thinking about how culture would move beyond what you just said. It's more than the ping pong table. It's more than the free food. It's not the features that come along with it. And I think a lot of people have probably tried to put features or solutions in place rather than getting to the root cause. And so, like you said, let's dive into the deep end on culture, because there are some things that we've seen that I know frame up a very different approach to culture and what culture actually means. And one of those, I think, is centered around behavior, actions, what people do. So talk to us about how culture frames up what people are actually doing day in and day out, like having hard conversations like we did this week.
Yeah, I think a couple of recent conversations and work with clients and trying to solve some of their problems. Here's how we landed on saying it, is that culture is revealed when behavior collides with values. There's a lot there. Let me say it again. Culture is revealed when behavior collides with values. In other words, here's what we say we value around here. Here's how we say we're going to do things. But then we recognize here's what's actually happening. And that gap, that collision is culture. Hey, it's one thing to say a thing and it's another thing to do it. And our real culture is what's actually happening in the middle. If you say you value collaboration, but there's still silos everywhere and everybody's competing against each other. If you say we want innovative new ideas, but then when somebody takes a risk, they get a little smack on the hand or something, that's where the real culture is. It's that collision point. It's that rub. It's that gap, however you want to describe that or however you experience that. We'd say that's where culture is revealed, and that's where the leadership opportunity begins.
A lot of our clients work with operating system like EOS, and one of the pillars of EOS is the push to tell the truth. And I think the way that culture, as you just described it, plays into that is, yeah, you can tell the truth, but just telling the truth isn't necessarily the best way. So how do you create the culture where people can tell the truth that is actually received on the other side? I think that's, as you described, it's really the collision with values of what do we want people to do that's different, that's uniquely us.
Yeah, I think we'll go into this a little bit deeper, but it really does start with leaders modeling the way. I think it's fine to have aspirational values. We have values for our team and our organization that we aspire to, but we also know that nobody perfectly embodies all those things every moment. And when we pretend that that's what we expect, I think that's a problem. That actually undermines our trust and our influence, because we never all live up to those things. But we aspire to them, and we talk about when we get it right, and we are willing to talk about when, hey, I'm not sure that was executed the way we expect. I think the key there is, I'd say it this way, don't footnote your culture. Don't say, here's what we value, but it's fine if you don't. Or, we value transparency. Well, unless it makes us look bad, don't tell that story. Or, we really care about our people unless they're underperforming. And then, let's just usher them out the door. We want you to have a work-life balance. We want you to prioritize your well-being, but we really reward the people who are sending the emails at midnight, right? So it's all that kind of stuff that are the footnotes, and every company and every culture has those. So if you think, oh, well, we don't do that, that's probably a footnote on your culture. We don't even tell the truth about where we're footnoting our culture. We all do it. And it's okay to say that we do, but it's recognizing those gaps and saying that there's a culture that's revealed there. Where those tensions are great places to have conversation. Why is it that we celebrate the person sending the emails at midnight? What's going on there? Is there something that they're getting right that we want to talk about? What's the gap, and how do we frame up the culture conversation in those places?
I think feedback is one of the examples that often shows us the truth behind what is culture actually, whether it's a leader's tendency or feedback from a customer. How do we attend to this? How do we respond to this? I've heard this a lot recently, and two examples. One came up from an organization that said, I think we are really nice, maybe overly nice and accommodating to our customers. And another company has just come out of the gates and gotten incredible 5-star reviews. I mean, this new upstart company, I think they're close to 25-star reviews, which is pretty impressive. And they have 20 reviews, so they're all 5-star. And I was sitting there thinking yesterday, what's the response going to be when they get their first one that's not 5 stars? And, you start thinking about that. To your point, we value transparency unless it makes us look bad. So do you hide the 4-star or the 2-star or the 1-star review? Do you report it to Google and try to get it removed from your listing? One of my favorite examples.
Make snarky comments about them in reply. Yeah, I've seen that approach too.
Yes, the passive aggressive.
Yeah.
There's actually a really good story I posted on LinkedIn from Liquid Death. They had a negative review 5 years ago. And this guy said, "This is awful. You're just putting water in a can. Why is anybody going to buy this? You're not going to exist as a company in 5 years. And if you are, I'll give you $100. They remembered it. And 5 years later, they said, "Hey, Dave, we want our $100. So there's kind of the playful, not taking it too seriously, but truly owning, hey, is there something important here for us to work on? And that feedback loop is a big indicator of building a strong, positive culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true even for us, right? We want to create a world-class client experience. And so we are often asking for feedback from our clients. And, when somebody gives, negative or constructive or a 3 or 4-star kind of feedback, I love to have a conversation. What did they actually experience there? Why did that happen? Was that them misunderstanding something? Was there something we failed to do on our part? We don't need to footnote it. We need to understand it and, listen without judgment, and then learn and make a plan.
And apologize if necessary.
Absolutely.
Those are all good cultural values. And that's really the important thing, I think, is culture isn't just a poster. It's not just a phrase. It's not something we create to put in our business plan documents when we're founding the company, but it really is about where the rubber meets the road. How and why do we do what we do every day? And how does that inform and influence our reactions and our responses? Speaking of where rubber meets the road, where have you seen this come alive in some of the clients that you've been working with recently?
Yeah, this is a common thing that we have conversations about senior leaders. I'm thinking of, a recent manufacturing company. They were trying to solve some execution gaps. They were growing, money was okay, but they were starting to experience some turnover. I think partly because they were driving so hard on the performance stuff, they were starting to lose some people along the way. And the chief people officer, her comment was, "Our culture's slipping." And I think what she really meant is, we're getting stuff done, but maybe we're getting stuff done in the wrong ways. We're solving problems in ways that don't reflect our values. We're pushing people harder. We're maybe being more domineering than we need to be at times to get the results. And so, the question for them, is this a culture problem? They've got a clear strategy. They've got strong talent. Their performance was still high. So on paper, a lot of things looked good, but in reality, there's a lot of friction, right? I think one of the things we did was begin with a team performance assessment. Like, we're just surveying the people. How engaged are they? How do they feel about the culture? What's their experience with their supervisors and their peers? And you start to recognize that, okay, there's some trends that are starting to show up. We're not following through on everything we'd say we follow through on, because we realize that only because there were some footnotes. Really, the only thing people care about is this number over here. So we're not going to do those things over there. And feedback was getting filtered. We don't think our boss is really listening anyway. So we're not going to tell him the hard stuff. He doesn't want to hear about how that machine always breaks down. And so we're just never going to get it fixed. We're just always going to be in trouble when we fall behind for the day. And then there's turnover that's trending up. So they've got all this stuff that's like cooking in the middle. At the top, everybody's clear. They're all, no, we're really clear. We have a great culture around here, except for the pressure and the friction is growing in the middle. That's one place we started the conversation.
I remember another client who achieved incredible results. And because the business was driven and focused on that numbers side, the output, the goals, the expectations, the expertise they had as a business, when they reached that goal, the natural reaction, the culture didn't influence them to celebrate. It influenced them to say, okay, now what's the new goal? And so recognizing that human capital is making up your business. These are people. They are humans. What do people need? It's kind of like building a greenhouse and operating a greenhouse. You've got to have the right ingredients. We can't just keep pushing. These aren't machines. They need rest. They need the culture and environment to help them thrive, which is more rhythm than just consistently being focused on putting the pedal to the metal.
Yeah. I think what we're both describing with those clients is, there's the declared culture, there's what we say we value, and then there's the demonstrated behavior over time. And I think really that's where our work shines, is giving teams, individuals, leaders, companies, all the lenses and mirrors that they need to see those things more clearly. Like when we can, and this goes back to the truth will set you free, right? Like, let's not be afraid of the truth. Let's see what's actually going on there. And then, we rarely would tell somebody well, you just need to fix the culture. That's not the solution, right? Fixing the culture isn't the thing. What we need to do is practice. We need to practice what we say we value. When we see a gap, we acknowledge it. We make a choice. Okay, what is it about our culture that we actually want to value in this gap? And then how do we step into it? So one of the things I love to help our clients understand is that culture doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be practiced. Culture doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be practiced. In fact, there's no such thing as a perfect culture. Every culture has its gaps. The best companies have their gaps. The best leaders acknowledge the gaps and step into them in micro ways, in micro moments, in the conversation before the meeting, or just pulling another teammate aside and saying, hey, that conversation we just had, maybe you didn't mean it this way, but it came across this way, and letting people know, giving them the feedback in the moment, not waiting till the annual performance review. It's all those little micro moments that really do shape the culture.
Those hard conversations can really help to reinforce and instill that culture, that practice. This quote that I'm going to say in just a minute, it kind of flies counter to no perfect culture, but I think the intent is there. Cal Ripken Sr. is often quoted as having said,
surprised to hear you offering us a baseball quote, Aaron. I mean,
I
love it.
So out of left field. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And I actually heard on a podcast recently, a former Orioles outfielder said he was in spring training one year, and a veteran outfielder from across the field yelled at him because he was just kind of loafing around, catching fly balls during batting practice and just lobbing the throw back in. And this veteran said, hey, come here. This is your opportunity to hone your craft. And so every repetition, every time you get to go through this motion, you get better. And I think that's what Cal Sr. meant, was your repetitions of doing it well and intentionally is what's going to increase your capacity. And so as we talk about culture, working through that process, that continued learning process, how do we continue to grow? How do we develop new skills, not just in the expertise of what we do, but in the day-to-day culture side, the people side, the relational side, that as leaders is really about bringing the best out of those we're leading. And so we've got to get good at that.
Yeah, and we can't expect perfection from people, right? I mean, I think, again, we were talking about summer and calendars getting compressed. We've had some stressed team members lately, and my expectation isn't, oh, well, what's wrong with them because they're stressed, right? Like, I think there's a culture moment there, right? Like, hey, we understand that there are stressful parts of this. And so let's adjust expectations. Let's offer care if needed. And, those are the kind of like micro moments. Like, we're not going to just push you harder and say, suck it up because it's summer and you just need to work harder. Like, that's a cultural choice right there. And so, it's those little moments of, I see you're stressed. What's contributing to that? But can we help you reprioritize, rather than just hoping that they'll sort it out themselves?
Just to be clear, we're not always talking about that stress impacting work when the stress comes from work. I mean,
right.
Just looking internally, so many of my challenges and what's been weighing on my mind, my heart, my shoulders lately are, storm damage around the house and home improvement projects and task lists and just things stacking up on the personal front and friends and extended family and things in that realm. So we're not always weighed down by things at work. And that's, I think, a key, that our culture has to give space for people to be people, because it allows us to be humans, not only 9 to 5 or whatever your working hours are each day, but 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that's where we have the kind of influence that truly makes a difference. And we've got to recognize that at work.
I think that there's something counterintuitive in that too, because I think when I imagine a couple of leaders that I know would challenge us on that idea right now, because they're like, we know people are supposed to show up at work and we have high expectations and we want them to perform well. And I'm like, I agree. Like, we have very high expectations for our team, but I think you're going to get closer to those results when you treat people like humans, right? When we allow space to treat them as whole people and not just for what they can and can't do when they show up at work. There's probably a whole other podcast episode there. We'll talk about it more.
There's plenty more to talk about. That's for sure. Well, we've covered a lot. Every culture has gaps. Nobody's perfect. It's human nature. It's the people that we work with. And leaders do truly have an opportunity to step into that gap. What would you say to leaders as they think about their own culture, discerning where they're at today, and how to take a step forward?
Yeah, if you are a leader in an organization, and by that I mean if you have any influence at all, so that's almost everybody, right? You have some influence, then I would say culture is part of your responsibility. That you're constantly making choices that either, fill the leadership or the culture gap or create it, and so leadership, culture, all that's not a HR problem. That's not a someday somebody else. It's a you issue. It's a today. I often talk with folks about what we call micro shaping the culture, right? It's these little moments. Hey, we start our meetings on time. That's a micro shaping moment. If I show up 10 minutes late every time, I'm shaping culture right there, right? So I'm in the room ahead of time. I'm ready to go. I'm ready. That's a micro shaping moment. Team member was stressed out. That's a micro shaping moment. Do I care or do I not care? These are the things. And so culture isn't the big overhaul or the annual retreat or all those things. It's not even what's on the poster. It really is how I show up in these moments where our values are at stake. And so that's the invitation I'd say to anybody that has influence. If you're working with customers, you have influence. If you are managing those that work with customers, you have influence, and all the way up to the top.
That's really good. Well, as people consider this, as leaders dive into culture and those micro actions that they are taking every day, what's a lens that can help them frame up this conversation and really focus in on where the action can be to elevate their culture?
We're going to share a link in our show notes here to a resource where it's really going to help people do a little self-reflection, because that's the best place to start, rather than saying, hey, our culture is, or, they point the finger to somebody else. We're always going to offer the invitation to, hey, start with me. What do I know about me that is helping shape the culture? And so, for me, it comes down to something as simple as let's list our current values or the cultural principles or the things that are most important around here. Reflect on how well am I leading those things? How consistently am I showing up in those places? And then how well am I shaping and calling those things up in others as well? Because it's one thing to lead by example. We all have to do that. But then we also all have to be willing to do that work to step into those gaps. And I would suggest that every one of us listening, myself included, you, Aaron Lee, we all have these places, like there are gaps and we need to step into them. And so again, the exercise that we're going to link to will help maybe shine a light into where some of those gaps might be. And then the invitation is, how can you step there this week? Not just, doesn't take a big thing, but is there a simple conversation? Is there a simple decision you could make? Is there an action you could take to step into the gap this week?
Yeah, and part of what will be included in that, and we'll link to it in the show notes at leadersrisingnetwork.com/podcast. Part of what is included in there is some key direct questions that then lead to specific actions. How do we take specific, targeted, focused next steps that will help us know? So you'll get some of the best insights that we have from just a few short questions, but starting you on that path. Jeff, I'm going to be even so bold to throw out one more resource. I'm going to say, if anybody wants to have a 30-minute coffee, virtual or in person, so if you're within driving distance of Richmond or Madison, one of us will meet you in person, but find us on LinkedIn, reach out to us. If you reach out to our team through the chat on our website, they'll get you connected with us. Those kinds of coffees are some of my favorite conversations to have, just to see what's going on in your organization and where can we help you find some targeted next steps. All right, Jeff, as we come in for a landing, where do leaders tend to get stuck as they're trying to think about putting some culture change into practice?
Yeah, I think one of the big ways that we get stuck on when it comes to culture is we just misunderstand what culture is. We either make it way too big and think it's going to take a massive overhaul or, a whole new leadership system or something like that, or we make it way too small or too soft, right? We treat it as secondary and like it doesn't matter at all. So either making it too big or too little really is where it gets stuck. Culture is how you show up in a way that reflects the values and what's most important about your company, your team, your organization. So that's what I'd say most people get stuck. Just, hey, am I showing up in a way that's consistent today, every day, at the next meeting, wherever I'm going next after this podcast?
And what's one bold step you would tell a leader to take this week?
Well, I'm going to suggest a courageous one, okay? This will take some courage. Ask your team, assuming you're a person who has some influence, you're leading some people, ask your team, what's a current challenge where our culture isn't showing up the way we say it does? That's a scary question. But let me just give it to you again. What's one current challenge where our culture isn't showing up the way we say it does? And then here's the most courageous part. And then shut up and listen. Just wait and give people permission. Once you start to listen and you maybe listen without some judgment, I bet you'll see a new gap and an opportunity to step into it, because that's what the best leaders do. They step into the culture gaps and lead the way.
Those are some bold, courageous steps. And if I may be so bold as to forecast, if any of you actually do that, have that honest heart-to-heart conversation, what you discover and what you do because of it will make a difference that will make a lasting impact for a long, long time, not only in your business for all the business kinds of reasons that we often think about, but it'll also make an impact in you. All right, Jeff, thanks for diving into culture today. I'm excited for these next few weeks to see what you get to experience. Bring those stories back to us. I just wish you could bring the food back with you, but that's okay. Just tell us about it. Don't make us too jealous, though.
Okay, I won't fly back some fresh pasta for you or anything.
All right, get the show notes, the links to everything we've mentioned today, leadersrisingnetwork.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leaders Rising Network podcast. Connect with us on LinkedIn or visit online at leadersrisingnetwork.com.